Turkmenistan, known as West Turkestan, as the homeland of the people of the same ancestry, culture, and faith with the Uyghurs. Before the Russian and the Manchu Qing occupation, Turkestan was an integrated geography in terms of economy, culture, and civilization, whose political borders were not sharp. For this reason, interregional population mobility was always taking place. The Russian and the Manchu occupation caused a population from West Turkestan to East Turkestan or from East Turkestan to the West Turkestan. The East Turkestan region is today with the border of People's Republic of China and its official name, as you know, in China, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The region was first transformed into a province of the PRC and then reconstructed in accordance with the ideology of Chinese Communist Party with the name Xinjiang Uyghur or Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in 1955. The minority nationalities policy in the PRC has undergone fundamental changes after 1990, especially in the East Turkestan and the Tibet regions, gradually shifted to a similar structure to the colonial system. Increasing Chinese immigrant population and the discriminatory policies have resulted in the enduring marginalization of nations such as Uyghur, Tibetan, Mongolian, Yi, or other names is Nosu, who have unique memory and strong ethno-national culture throughout China. In the particular, after 1997, the CCP accelerated its policy and the practice of marginalization and exclusion of Uyghurs in China and abroad. In this context, the CCP regime has arrested Uyghur businessmen, clerks, intellectuals, arts, and opinion leaders of society in East Turkestan on the grounds of their so-called hard strike campaign with Chinese Yanda, and punished them in the most severe way. If implementation violates current Chinese laws, on the other hand, CCP tightened the persecution of Uyghurs living abroad, tracking, harassment, pressure, and even arresting and bringing back the Uyghurs in Muslim countries. Under the influence of China, especially Shanghai Cooperation Organization, have increased. The CCP regime has engaged in an unprecedented scale of transnational repression that had reached 28 countries worldwide. China's transnational repression of Uyghurs has been consistently on the rise and has accelerated dramatically with the onset of its system mass surveillance and the Nazi concentration camp implementation in East Turkestan since 2017, showing a correlation between repression at home and abroad. In this paper, the author, of course me, mainly focused on the Uyghur refugees, majority of whom came to Turkey via Southeast Asia, after briefly explaining why and how the Uyghur population had to migrate from their homelands or to foreign countries. This study will provide first-hand information about the current situation of the Uyghur refugees in Turkey and the problems they encounter. The interview data, of course, this research is qualitative research. The interview data used in this article were collected on various dates in Istanbul, Ankara, and Kayseri. In addition, this study aims not only to cover the complex situation of Uyghur refugees and the main problems they had to face, but also examine consequences of the political situation from a humanitarian perspective. The main reason of forcing Uyghurs to migrate from their motherland in East Turkestan. The homeland of Uyghurs has turned it into a region where war, massacre, turmoil, and exiles were experienced intensely after Manchu Qing invasion. The Fergana Valley of West Turkestan became an important shelter for the Uyghurs while escaping from war and the massacre within this period. The last migration from East Turkestan to West Turkestan happened during the CCP period. The migration of over 100,000 Uyghur Kazakhs from East Turkestan to Soviet Union in the Ili Valley from 1954 to 1963. After the Cold War and the collapse of Soviet Union, the system allowed to see Uyghurs travel from East Turkestan to Central Asian country more easily. In this process, it was known that significant number of Uyghurs were and continue to be in West Turkestan republics for various reasons, especially for border trade. Naturally, a significant number of Uyghurs who escaped from pressure, assimilation, and exclusion that constantly increased after 1994 in East Turkestan and come to Central Asian republics. After the Manchurian occupation, Istanbul also became the safest haven for the peoples of East Turkestan. The last migration from the region to Turkey is a group that came through Afghanistan and was placed in Kayseri as resident immigration around 1965. Here, another large number of Uyghur immigrants or asylum seekers who are our main research subject came over or were brought via Southeast Asia, especially after 5th July Urumqi massacre. With the end of the Cold War, the CCP accelerated what it called second generation minority policy. In this context, the Uyghur and the Tibetan autonomous regions after 1994, including the current constitution of the China, regional autonomy law, religious belief law, and the language rights and usage laws related to the interest of the non-Chinese minority people in the autonomous region have almost been shelved. Political circles or regulation usually issued by the CCP Secretariat, which actually conflict with the relevant laws of the PRC, determined the region's religious education and the cultural policy along assimilationist and chauvinist lines. The marginalization and the exclusion of Uyghurs and the Tibetans, first through China and then in their own autonomous region, has made the situation ordinary. Chinese administration adopted that management style, which we can call the transformation by empowerment method, in the economy, social, cultural, religious, and educational institutions in order to integrate the Uyghurs into Chinese society, or rather to assimilate them completely in the whole area. In the region, this method has been persistently applied systematically for the last 30 years. The CCP administration, which actively participates in the rhetorics that provided in Western politics after the September 11 attacks, adopted a method of punishment and discrimination with the state apparatus by placing Uyghurs on the target board, covertly set up Uyghurs as a state enemy. As of this date, China has been insisting on practice that will radicalize Uyghurs as far as possible within the outside and inside of a region. For instance, since 1994, religious worship and religious education has been totally banned, and the dissemination of atheism and Satanism education as far as the village. The removal of the Uyghur language from education and administrative systems since 2003, the forced dissemination of Chinese language and culture in all layers of life, especially in schools, government, and social lives. Forcing single Uyghur girl in the 16 to 22 years old age group, which numbered hundreds of thousands since 2006, to transfer to the industrial cities in near China. Today, so-called forced labor or slave workers. Mass surveillance and mass arrestment since 2009 and the largest concentration camp implementation since 2017 and today they call it Uyghur genocide. Between the years 2012 to 2015, by arguing with organized human traffickers in the southern borders of China, the most important part of Uyghurs who first crossed the frontier of Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos, and then reached Malaysia, then most of them arrived to Turkey. There is no precise information on the total number of this group in Turkey. It is known that today this population, which has estimated at more than 15,000 in Istanbul, Kayseri, Ankara, and Konya, continuously lives under very difficult conditions. It is most important situation which should be imposed in a way that they have been able to cross from their protected Chinese borders to Vietnam, Thailand, illegally with their families. Since Uyghurs are nations that can be immediately distinguished within the borders of China with their physical images, clothes, and in educated Chinese. One of the NGO officials working on fulfilling various needs of Uyghur immigrants in Istanbul expressed the following opinion on this group. The immigrations of those people from East Turkestan started with the actualism of conditions masterminded by Chinese government, and it lasted for 6 years. Most of young, tens, thousands of which could be 15,000, who were getting fed up with the pressure and oppression participate in this migration flow and came to Turkey. And the other Uyghur refugees participating in my research and gave the following response to the question about why you migrated from your homeland. He answers, who would live from place of birth, relatives, and friends, and the cities in the foreign land? We were desperate. We couldn't have done what the Chinese ever said and what the Chinese ever wanted. They did not give us any of our rights guaranteed by Chinese constitution and the religious belief law. Those who tell them that what they do is contrary to their laws, those who complain them to court, and those who apply the higher authorities are arrested and several tortured. They even were killed. The secretary of the Chinese Communist Party openly told us, I am the law, what I said, what happened. They were doing and getting what they wanted. They tried to hit us from our most sensitive part. At first, they applied abortion, then they totally forbade our religion, and at the very last, they removed our language from education and education. They took over 16 years old girls forced to work in China. In China, they resorted to unimaginable ways to test whether we fasted during Ramadan. Uyghur refugees in Turkey trying to survive in Istanbul, Zeytinburnu and Safa regions and the Kayseri under very difficult conditions for the last 8 to 9 years. The problems they encounter are the most same. For example, legal resident permit, health academician, work permit, education, and security. November 2017, one of the NGO officials who is closely interested in the various problems on this group has given the following information about the problem they face. So far, those people do not have any official status as a result of many years of negotiation and our struggle of their residence permit. The right to apply has been granted, however, because of the required strange, complex conditions and the impossible documents, only a few people were able to get their residence permits. Therefore, they face very serious problems, which include their jobs and the children's education, such as health, most importantly, accommodation. We applied both to the state and the government bodies and NGOs. However, no significant step has been taken yet. I would like to especially point out that the health problems are facing very tragic dimension, and there have been very critical incidents lately. Recently, an increasing number of irregular and random detention, arrested operations are turning the lives of Uyghurs into hell in Turkey. China's various initiatives and the pressures since 2017 have started to produce results. An increase was reported in the arrest of Uyghurs who live in Istanbul and Kayseri, and they transferred to repatriation centers. Those kinds of development in Uyghur refugee community have created insecurity and concern in thousands of Uyghurs who do not have Turkish identity or Turkish passport or long-term legal residence permits. Therefore, they have started to seek ways to go to safer countries. Citizenship rights cannot be obtained because those who fulfill the 5-year residence requirement in Turkey face some difficulties in the civil registration office. On the other hand, one of the important problems experienced by the Uyghurs is safety issue and the feeling of constantly being threatened. The reason for this situation is that the security units of the Chinese state, especially the intelligence service, keep Uyghurs living abroad in a very strict monitoring. Local authorities have managed to control the Uyghurs abroad as they desire with various rational practices such as taking related as hostages and imprisoning them. In this regard, one of the refugees has provided the following information. They searched my mother-in-law's house and they took my wife's brothers because we escaped abroad. My mother-in-law got sick from fear, then became hospitalized, and we cannot fear this from them. We heard it indirectly from other sources, and they told us what happened. The last time we had a conversation with her, she states that promise me that you will not be involved in anything there, that you will not betray China. Then record this verbal promise with your voice and send it to me on WeChat. I can show it to the policeman when they ask. Thus, my mother-in-law said to us, if you care about us, don't do anything wrong there. Don't be friends with anyone. Just go to work and come home. Don't talk to anybody because you are there watch hour. On the other hand, the problems of fragmented families are different dimensions. On the one hand, there's families struggle with the legal problems such as residence permits. On the other hand, they were unable to pay rental fee and the other expenses of their house. The number of people in the situation is rising day by day. The situation of those who used the money they brought from the country has also started to deteriorate. Some people started to leave Turkey illegally. A woman whom the researcher knew and followed close has found the solution to take refuge in Germany with her 2 children. The following information on the subject was given to the researcher. As you know, my husband was trading between Urumqi and Istanbul. We came to Istanbul to give our children a good education. Also, it was very expensive. We registered over 2 children to provide private school. The children were very successful. My husband was arrested and put in camps in Urumqi at the beginning of 2017. We never heard from him again. We also finished the money he left us. The private school administration made a discount due to the success of the children, but I became unable to pay for it. Even though I want to go to work, I did not find it appropriate to go to illegal job as a woman because I did not have work permission. Because I am an internal medicine doctor who granted from medical university and specialist, our diploma equivalence did not come out either. We no longer felt safe in Turkey because many of my acquaintances were taken to removal centers by Turkish police. Also, the fact that Zinnetul Tursun was extradited to Tajikistan and then to China with her two children scared us even more. I left with trusting God and without informing you. Thank Allah, I reached Germany safely. I feel safe here now. The other community from the other Uyghurs group come to Turkey from Egypt. This is most of them is a student, and after 2017, they fled to Turkey because Chinese and Egypt administrations on July 5th, 2017, signed an agreement and they began to arrest the students in Egypt University, especially Al-Azhar University. And the news, hundreds of students arrested and taken to China has created alarm among the Uyghur students, and then those who could obtain a Turkish visa fled to Turkey. The problems of this group is different from other groups, especially since the connection with their parents was interrupted. They were financially challenged, and the absolute majority run out of money. Especially the situation of those who are married and have children is even worse. Due to the practice in the Turkish education system, it became impossible for the Uyghur students to resume their education from where they left off in Egypt. Those who were able to settle in university through various channels started to work illegally at low salaries because they had no financial power to cover their daily living expenses and including tuition fee. Those students generally suffered from mental breakdowns and psychological depression. Because of the time, I would like to conclude my presentation. The Uyghur refugees stated that they had to leave their homeland as a result of the assimilation and the discriminatory policy of China towards Uyghurs. They came to Turkish state, especially Turkey, with the idea that China would no longer bother them and therefore they would live comfortable. As a result of increasing China's influence and the pressure, especially Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the West Turkestan, so-called Central Asian states, have completely ceased to be safe haven for the Uyghurs. Also, Turkish government has allowed those people to enter and live in Turkey. They were not given any legal status due to legislation and the Chinese reservation. This group posed by financial difficulties, hopelessness, and the psychological breakdown has become open to various abuses. In fact, a considerable number of people were taken to Syria. The Turkish people and the various charities have tried to look after these people who do not have any official status. Despite all the difficulties, whether it is refugees coming from Southeast Asia or students coming from Egypt, they continue to live on a minimum level with the support of various Turkish NGOs, especially East Turkestani NGOs in their respective provinces. It is very important that the state institutions, especially the Turkish state, act as soon as possible to solve the problems of the Uyghurs in both groups and prevent them from being exploited by various organizations. However, there's limited aids were insufficient in terms of sustaining their lives. Moreover, the situation was also effective in forming the dependency on aid. It is almost impossible for Uyghurs living in Turkey to return to China, back to East Turkestan under current conditions. Therefore, the extradition treaty signed between China and Turkey causes serious fears among the Uyghurs. Uyghurs living in fear of being taken to removal centers resort to illegal ways to take refuge in safer countries than Turkey. But Uyghurs also know through the example of Idris Hassan that they might be arrested in countries where China has influence and extradited to China. If the problems outlined above are not solved, it's certain that it will trigger the emergence of more complex problems. The only shelter where Uyghurs who sees Turkey as their second homeland can keep their faith and their culture alive is Turkey. Of course, after numerous abuses and public pressures, it is known that the Turkish government has started to grant citizenship to some Uyghur exceptionally in recent months. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kaluk, for your presentation. And the next presentation is from Professor Shir. He's an Associate Research Fellow with the Institute for National Defense and Security Research. He's, of course, going to highlight on the international sanctions on China's human rights violations in Xinjiang and response from China. We all know that, of course, China came out with a white paper in 2020 as a response to, in a bid to address the international concerns. Of course, it was a whitewash from the Chinese Communist Party, but we'd like to hear about more responses that we have seen from China from Professor Shir. Over to you, Professor Shir.
I really feel sorry for those Uyghurs being staying in China in the camps. I've been studying the Uyghur issue for around 2 decades. Many Uyghur friends, actually, I met Professor Abdulrashid Kaluk and also Professor Eke I met in Turkey, probably more than once, twice, 3 times. Anyway, I think I'll go into these issues on the Chinese human rights abuse in Xinjiang and also the current development. I think before starting the formal presentation, I think there's a few questions, probably 3 questions, need to bear in mind. How should we categorize this Xinjiang camp policy? Is it assimilation, no matter you call it forced or voluntary? It's a Chinese assimilation policy, or it's a genocide policy, which is try to destroy the Uyghur peoples and rebuild, reconstruct the Chinese nation. The second question, what would be the aim of this Xinjiang camp policy? Is it aiming for counterterrorism, or simply thinking for another human rights perspective? It tried to develop a Chinese version of human rights practice. And the third question is something to do with the nature of these policies. It has been dynamic and also transformed. I wouldn't say these policies started from 2017, but actually nowadays the international media coverage somehow highlighted the policy being introduced by Chen Quanguo, we start from 2017. But actually, I would say it has been initiated, probably start from 2014 under Zhang Chunxian. Though they don't have this massive scale of camp, but they have different kinds of policy. They call it 访会剧, which means they dispatch Han Chinese cadre to the southern part of Xinjiang or countryside to stay with the Uyghur families and monitors and try to collect all kinds of information. But anyhow, I would argue it start from 2014 instead of 2017. So this policy has been introduced for quite a while, probably more than 5 years, 7, 8 years. Definitely need to be evaluated and re-evaluated, being modified. And at the same time, the nature of the policy probably transformed from internal kind of domestic policy thing with now an international kind of perspective. These are 3 questions I think we need to bear in mind before we go through everything, all the details. Nowadays it's not feasible to visit Xinjiang to pay any field trip. So basically, I will stick to these 4 types of materials and try to analyze them and then try to reach certain conclusion. There's 4 types of materials: Chinese official kind of documents, international media coverage, and third would be the kind of policy report or policy analysis being seriously done by different thinkers, scholars, academians. The fourth would be the verdict of those peoples come from the camp, now staying abroad. There are 2 kinds of Chinese official document. One has been, there are many actually being produced by Chinese government. It turned out to be kind of propagandas. They're in visual and also in written form. There are white papers, documentaries. Some of that I put down here. If you're interested, you can easily find them online. Although they are propaganda, but also they kind of deliver certain information. I think it's interesting. If we have time in the Q&A, we probably can use them as illustration to discuss certain of them. The second one start from 2018. There are many leaked official documents. The most prominent one would be the China cables from the US-based ICIJ, International Consortium of Investigative Journalism, and then we have others. The most recent one would be Xinjiang police files being released by Dr. Adrian Zenz, and then being investigated by 14 different international media, and many useful information. We can use them to prove what has been done by China. International media coverage start from 2017 is widely reported. Just name a few put on here. One of important kind of database which been given by an Australian think tank called SPI, which is somehow is a multi-government sponsored think tank, including Taiwan, United States, and certain European countries, Japan as well. And these are China, this is Xinjiang Data Project, produce many useful informations, which you may retrieve them online. And also the last type of material will be victims' verdict. You can easily find from these different sources: Uyghur Human Rights Project, Radio Free Asia Uyghur Department, Human Rights Watch, Atatürk Kazakh Human Rights. Actually, I've been interviewed with certain workers, volunteers from Atatürk Kazakh Human Rights, very important sources for the camp information. One of the most recent one would be the Uyghur Tribunal. Actually, it has its significance, which is somehow turned out to be a threat to Chinese authority, somehow forced them to change certain policy in Xinjiang. Next, what would be the implications can learn from these materials? I think that that's the first points. I would say the Xinjiang camp definitely is a kind of forced assimilation policy introduced by the CCP authority. under the name of counterterrorism threat or de-radicalizations. It's been briefly mentioned by Dr. Abdulrashid Khaluk. There are people's militants in Syria and also Afghanistan. China used these as excuse for probably more than 20 years since 9/11 to nowadays. They say there's huge threat to Xinjiang society or Chinese society, so they need to introduce a very different measures to de-radicalize these Islamists. But this is somehow exaggerated. You shouldn't put 1 million or more than 1 million people into the camp in thinking of de-radicalize the terrorists. Secondly, learning from those different materials, we know that nowadays, widely and internationally, people accuse these Xinjiang camp policies of human rights abuse to the extent of genocide. And what would be the definition of genocide? I think for the last probably 3 years, and there are academic scholars discussing these questions. But put them together, I found at least there are 3 types of definitions. And these 3 type definitions are actually being studied by Chinese government carefully as well. The first one, why the Chinese study them? Because they are trying to avoid this accusation. First one would be genocide is a permanent damage to the culture of a specific ethnic group, which is a scholarly viewpoints proposed by Raphael Lemkin, I think around 1940s, a long time ago, before or during the Second World War. It covered widely. It's not only kind of physical damage to a group of people, but also psychologically. So sometimes people confuse genocide with cultural genocide, whether we should include cultural genocide into the accusation of genocides, which means killing. And this is the first type of definition. The second one is something to do with the international convention, international agreement being signed in 1948 after the Second World War. I think these conventions definitely including the 2 things, and cultural genocide and physical killing together. But at the same time, these conventions give us a judicial process how to prosecute a genocide if it's been committed by authority or by a particular state, which means you need to identify their the genocide criminal intent and also act together. If they simply have intent but no actions, it cannot be constituted as a complete genocide kind of crimes. And these judicial concept has been adopted by the Uyghur Tribunal in London a year ago. Thirdly, before that, if you can prove there's a criminal intent and criminal act together, which means you can make someone or some party to be responsible for this genocide charge. Thirdly, Holocaust, definitely, which is obviously using to describe, to illustrate the Nazi Germany, the committed crime they had done in the Second World War is mass killing. Okay, so how should we conclude these 3 types of genocide definition? In fact, I think before 2019, actually people has very awkward understanding on what has been done in Xinjiang. And what they have in mind, I think around 2007, 2018, they're confused. Definitely there's something happening in Xinjiang, but they don't know what to do. There are people propose we need to use this Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act treat China, but also there's people from Europe, from United States is thinking to give pressure, even collective pressure to the Chinese authority, thinking to conduct further investigation on the camp. That's around 2018. And there are people propose economic sanction. Actually, all these different measures, different policy has been taken afterwards. International sanction, if you look at this, is one of the important part of this presentation. I think from a time sequence, you can find actually before 2018, or even before the end of 2019, international players, international politics, they treat this as a pawn, which means it's a bargaining chips between China and others, especially the United States governments under Trump administrations, which you can find evidence. For example, special security advisor to Trump, John Bolton, his memoir, he said actually around the summer of 2019, there's a G20 summit in Japan. Trump talked to Xi Jinping, and actually Trump has no accusation on what Xi has done in Xinjiang. Actually tried to encourage Xi to carry on its policy in Xinjiang. This is quoted from John Bolton's book. And this Xinjiang factor, actually, there are all kinds of voices being covered, international media, politicians, scholars, accused China has done. But politician, the top politician in the world, actually, they don't take it very seriously. Then stage 2, late 2019, all kinds of sanctions has been introduced. I think the most important one would be sanction on those provincial cadres, including Chen Quanguo and others, and also those from the Xinjiang production and what's that? XPCC production and I forgot the full name in Chinese. And then they accuse Xinjiang government put all kinds of mistreatment to the Uyghur and other Turkic minority peoples, including collecting DNA, including forced labors and others, and forced women to abort their child, and kind of wrong treatment. And United States start to introduce economic sanction, trade banning, and also legislate many bills, try to help the Uyghur. However, also receive all kinds of criticism. And the European unions, they follows in a very slow motion mode. But recently they changed their attitudes. But before the breaking of the Ukraine war, actually, China signed a comprehensive trade agreement with the European unions. But due to the sanction the Chinese put on the European Parliament and European scholars, and the breakup of the Ukraine war, this agreement has not been finalized. What would be the implication for these international sanctions? I think to summarize, at the first stage, before 2019, the end of 2019, there's Xinjiang camp not being treated very seriously, although the different voice has been covered by international media. But since 2019, all kinds of sanction has been introduced. And nowadays, I think the Biden administration is trying to narrow it down and try to make the sanction more precise, target on certain particular government official and also companies who has huge interests being generated by having this camp put into work. China's response, that's very interesting. I think China was very aware of these sanctions and also problems can trace back to mid of 2019. And the Xinjiang CCP Deputy Secretary, which is a Uyghur, Shadat Zaki, he said actually 90% of these so-called students or detainee has been released. And Chinese produced a series of white papers and also propaganda, which has been introduced at the very beginning of this presentation. The argument they have in mind is they say, okay, there's all kinds of basic human rights, and probably they abuse some of them, but the priority for the list of the human rights the Chinese propose is to safeguard the rights of employment, the rights of working, instead of freedom of speech, or freedom of assembly, or religious freedom, etc. So they argue they are trying to finding a job for everyone in this white paper published in August 16th. And at the same time, they also emphasize the camp turned out to be extremely efficient to counter terrorist attack. And the others, they keep on give us different numbers, how significant and also effective the camp been helping Xinjiang people to turn out to be employed. And then they have propagandas. They introduce what has been done in the Xinjiang camp as well. 三学一去. I try to finish as soon as possible. The current development. I think the current development is, just last month, the UN Human Rights Council, UN Human Rights High Commissioner, she paid a visit to Xinjiang. And before her visit, I think the Beijing authority has made up their mind. They try to diffuse these Xinjiang camp or Xinjiang factors out of US-China rivalry at the moment. They try to isolate these factors, hoping the Human Rights High Commissioner can endorse what has been done in Xinjiang, saying they have not been seriously or heavily abused the Uyghur rights. But so far, not that successful, because we know when her visit Xinjiang, at the same time, the Xinjiang police files has been leaked to the public. And there's several important points also mentioned in these Xinjiang police files. The first one, shot to kill. You don't need to go through a proper judicial process. If someone being detained in the camp try to escape, you can just shoot them. That's definitely unbearable. Second, which is resemble what has been highlighted in the conclusion of the verdict of the Uyghur court, a Uyghur tribunal in London in 2019 and 20. It says actually the whole Xinjiang camp policy should be retributed to Xi Jinping, to the central people's government, instead of provincial cadres, which means the Xinjiang 工作小组 or Xinjiang leading working groups, including Xi Jinping, they need to be fully responsible for what has been witnessed in last 5 to 8 years in Xinjiang. The third one is an unreasonable amount of people being put into jail under the accusation of terrorist attack. So this Xinjiang police file, I think it definitely offset the visit of the High Commissioner, UN Human Rights High Commissioner visit to Xinjiang. Concluding remarks. I think Xinjiang factor nowadays definitely is not the internal or domestic issue. It turned out to be international. And we need to understand it in the context of China-US rivalry or China's versus the world moment. And whether it's a likely or kind of human rights abuse or it's a general accusation, and these discussions will be persisted. And probably we'll go into a kind of legal kind of approach or process in the futures. And nowadays, people try to identify more and more evidence saying this is something has been taken place in Xinjiang for quite a while. And also, definitely, there's someone need to be responsible for what they have done in Xinjiang. It's not only the provincial culture, but also the central government decision makers. Thirdly, I think there's another issue which we need to also highlight and pay special attention to it. It's something to do with unconventional security issues. Make it simple, kind of terrorist threat. This kind of militants. China keep on claiming there are some in Afghanistan, there are some in Syria. No matter what reason, the people has been brought to these areas, but they involved in these kind of Islamic activities. If in the future, let's say only if there are Uyghur militants attack Xinjiang or they join some sort of, I don't know, because it's only simply a speculation. And probably China will going to use these kind of activities to justify what they have been done in Xinjiang. This is another factor we need to bear in mind. Lastly, I think China is going to reorient their Xinjiang camp policies because they found if they want to diffuse Xinjiang factor from their international kind of intended expansion move, they need to kind of reduce the kind of criticism from international arena. For one thing is they can't keep on using anti-terrorism or the law, anti-terrorism law in China to justify what they have done in Xinjiang. They need to reorient this to some kind of national education policy or vocational training regulation, etc., etc., to justify what they have done in Xinjiang. And in the future, they will change the way to counter these kind of camp policies, which try to minimize the kind of accusation or blame from abroad. This is something which I have done so far. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question, welcome, and we can discuss it in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sher. I think we'll move to our next speakers. We have two speakers next who are going to co-present their paper on the Chinese Communist Party's employment of hard power to assimilate the Uyghurs in East Turkestan, the case of Uyghur Diaspora in Turkey. I would like to welcome Ms. Sadia Rahman, who's a PhD candidate in the National Cheng Kung University, Taiwan, and Professor Erkine Emmet, who's the Associate Professor at Ankara University, Turkey. I'll welcome both of you, and you can begin with your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the kind introduction. Can you hear me quite well?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, wherever we are. I will be doing the presentation. Of course, Professor Erkine Emmet has co-authored with me, but I will single-handedly do the presentation. In the Q&A, we can take the questions together. So this research is based on the data I collected in Turkey while I was in Turkey last year for over 2 months. And I thank Professor Erkine Emmet for, helping me to conduct research. I visited around 50 Uyghur families, interviewed 50 Uyghur people in different cities of Turkey, Ankara, Konya, and Istanbul. So the last part of my presentation would be based on my data which I collected, while the first 3 sections I would be theoretically talking about the present situation in East Turkestan. And this is my presentation overview, which I will be describing about the phenomena of framing and threat perception, which we have described this as a deliberate process. I would be discussing the theoretical background, why the threat perception has emerged in East Turkestan, how or what is the role related to CCP's threat model with identity and power. I would be dealing with the discourse of terrorism in East Turkestan, how it has been internationalized in East Turkestan, and the use of employment of hard power on account of assertive assimilation in East Turkestan. So let's begin with the first slide. We define threat perception as a phenomena, as a framing phenomena, which is related to a power of tool. And certainly this tool of power is, loaded with state or institutions or any other entities. In the context of state, if a threat is perceived, generally in a discursive manner, related to an individual or an ethnic group, definitely a negative connotation gets attached to it. And what is the negative connotation? It is the threat to territorial sovereignty. And if this negative connotation is said by a state entity, it leads to political action. That political action is in the form of crackdown. So we discuss this discursive practice in the form of deliberate process. And if you see this in the context of China, this has materialized in the dominant identity perspective, which is we-ness, Han-centric perspective. CCP, since it has become preeminent, and since the inception of CCP, it has survived on the politics of inclusion and exclusion. Yes, there were phases of preferential phases of policies and softer assertive assimilation phase, but then the idea or the agenda of inclusion and exclusion was there. Although CCP recognizes 56 ethnic groups, but Han is the majority dominant identity, which is equivalent to the Chinese identity, and Han culture is equivalent to the Chinese culture. That is, in that context, the Uyghur people in East Turkestan is facing exclusion. What is the exclusion? Exclusion is their Turkic identity. And in a broader understanding, if you perceive a threat from an ethnic group, if you see that, whenever an ethnic group see an encroachment in their territory, that results in an ethnic conflict or violence or unrest. But in contrast, when China started the Han immigration policy in East Turkestan, we saw this policy was clubbed with the identity of dominant identity politics. What I mean by this is the Uyghurs, it is not the native people, but it is not the Han, but the native people had to learn the mainstream Han culture. They were expected to assimilate or adapt to the mainstream Han culture. We refer this as majoritarianism or Chineseness. That is why you see the present time strike hard in East Turkestan, or the securitization of East Turkestan is linked to this perspective. In China, if you have noticed, under different leaders, there were difficult times, of course, and China have survived these difficult times because of adaptation and resilience, right? But the dominant idea was Han discourse remained as a dominant discourse, which we introduce or relate to Buzan's concept of secure societal identity, that Han is equivalent to the Chinese identity. Under Xi Jinping, what has happened is Xi Jinping does not tolerate any kind of parallel ideology, mediating identities, or any kind of ethno-nationalism. This has been seen as a threat. So after he came to power in 2012, he proposed the idea of China Dream, rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. These imply that he is on the road, or he is on the path of making a unified common Chinese nation. For that, he has to implement a policy which, assimilate all the mediating identities and make a common identity. That is what we are seeing in East Turkestan right now. But a little bit of background to threat perception. Why Uyghur identity is perceived as a threat? Because it is connected to Turkic identity, which China say this as a perceive this as a misguided identity. And in the official discourse since the 1990s, you would have seen this. It started as separatism activists, and then it turned later into terrorist activism, right? So officially, post 9/11, China declared its war on terrorism. It joined the US camp. We see this as a departure officially from a multi-ethnic state. Why do I say that? Because the Uyghurs were denied. Of course, the Uyghurs had Turkic identity, but they were not seen as loyal, good model Chinese citizens. And they were denied of their Islamic identity through release of white papers. This white paper was released in 2003. The recent one was released in 2019, which asserted that Xinjiang or East Turkestan did not have only Islam. There were multiple religions as well, denying the Islamic identity. So from the phase of managing pluralism, which by drafting preferential policies, it shifted to controlling cultural diversity. And in that context, Chinese Islamic associations were co-opted into the party. Whatever the Chinese Islamic associations would say would benefit the party. It was actually fine-tuned in such a way. And Uyghurs' culture or religious practices were seen as outdated and threat again. So once established that Uyghurs are, there was an in-group and there was an out-group, the Uyghurs are considered as out-group. The kind of Han migrants settled in East Turkestan and the Uyghurs, they share a kind of an antagonistic relationship. Of course, identity dissimilarity already existed. So there was discriminatory sentiments towards each other. And while I was doing my interviews, I asked this common question to most of my respondents, that what kind of relationship did they share with the Han migrants in East Turkestan while they were living there? And most of them responded, actually, majority of them responded to me that they did not have good relations with Han. They did not have Han friends. They did not like eating food with Han friends because it was not halal. They live in segregation, of course. Generally, the Uyghurs who live in the rural areas. And they, since 1990s, they have resisted the idea of Sinicization or assimilation, which Xi Jinping has been implementing the idea of Sinicization with hard power. The discourse on terrorism was established in the 1990s since 9/11, when China declared war on terrorism. But how was it internationalized? It was internationalized by engaging in certain speech acts, which was in 2004, Hu Jintao at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He talked about 3 evil forces, which means that terrorism, separatism, and extremism. This is, in reference to Uyghur identity and Uyghur activities. How later on this 3 evil forces was normalized in the CCP party discourse, while by the local Uyghur officials in East Turkestan, such as Noor Bakery, he also used such phrases whenever he used to give speeches. Related to that, I asked my respondents, several of my respondents, about the condition of terrorism in East Turkestan. I would quote here Dr. Abdul Karim here. He did not deny the idea or the activities of violence in East Turkestan or some Uyghur people present in Syria, but he also questioned the activity that how in sizable amount Uyghurs could pass through the borders and contribute to the ISIS fighting or in Syria. And how can the entire Uyghur community be labeled as terrorist and go through a re-education process? Is it possible that the entire Uyghur community, 1 million or 2 million people, is plagued with terrorist ideas? So he also posed such doubts when the label of terrorism or threat or terrorist activities is attached to Uyghur people. If you see the 2009 Urumqi riot, everybody knows about this. This was internationalized and covered by the international media when happened under the name of terrorism. But the other story, which not many people know, which 2 of my witnesses told me, describing the event as Uyghur massacre, because after the violence, late in the evening when Uyghurs were protesting against the unfair allegations, which happened at the People's Square, in the evening, Chinese police came looking for the Uyghur protesters. They hunt down every houses and they were killing those Uyghur protesters. This is the fact that not many people know. And that is why they described this as Uyghur massacre. After that, Xi Jinping came to power and he, exacerbated the counter-terrorism measures. He ramped up his activity or activism at international platforms. He was driving the SCO organizations, not only with the Central Asian states, but also with Western states like USA, UK, France to gather more support against the counterterrorism measures. And he the counterterrorism measure became, a circumstantial politics became a normalized phenomena in the context of policies in East Turkestan, and he created a national security law. The outline of the national security law is such that it is a very broad law that any act could be considered an act of terrorism or extremism. Even keeping an Arabic name or probably sporting a beard or wearing a hijab could be considered an act of terrorism, and you could land up in jail or imprisonment. And secondly, he uses this act measure of counterterrorism with impunity to, suppress the Uyghurs, and whose consequences we are seeing right now, that the Uyghurs are in concentration camp. I also asked my respondent that what is the strategy of Xi Jinping when it comes to employment of counterterrorism measures. They told me that the current counterterrorism measure actually is of two kinds. Region or cities bordering the Central Asian states like Atosh, Kashgar, Hotan, these cities face repressive counterterrorism measures compared to capital city Urumqi. And my respondent told me that although he testified that his mom and dad was taken to concentration camp, but he can still talk to his father right now, just because the counterterrorism measure in Turpan is less harsher compared to other cities bordering a Central Asian region. And if you see, between 2014 and 16, several of the speeches of the Chinese officials, they have repeatedly emphasized on the idea of Uyghurs getting prone or vulnerable to extremist thoughts. We see this as, this was seen as an act of, as a strike hard campaign initiated by Xi Jinping in 2014 with a mixture of digital surveillance and hard power. But as Professor Shir was pointing out, that this does not started in 2017. It has roots in 2014 and 15. Yes, my respondent also confirmed he is a Kazakh origin, but he has relatives in East Turkestan, in Kashgar. And in 2015, he visited Kashgar to see his family members. There, he noted that it felt a lockdown to him that time itself because he hardly found people in the streets. He was spotted by the Chinese police and interrogated that why is he visiting the region and why is he taking pictures. All sorts of questions were posted on him. And then he was in a family gathering, dinner gathering, where the Uyghur members asked him that can he practice religion in Kazakhstan. He was surprised listening to such questions, and when he asked why was they asking such things, they showed him something. It was like a wall covered with carpet. It was a Kaaba picture, like the holy shrine of Kaaba was concealed in the wall. So he was narrating that he sensed this kind of activity, that the change has happened in East Turkestan, and holding on to religious practices was impossible since then. When Cheng Kung came to power, we know that he used hard power with digital surveillance, that is integrated joint operation platform, where Uyghurs are supposed to give their iris scanners or voice or physical features, which makes them easier to detect whatever Uyghur activities are doing, so that they can face punishment either in concentration camps or imprisonment. In an interview with Dr. Byler, I was talking to him. He wrote this book recently on an account of his visit to East Turkestan. His last visit was in 2018, and he also, testified that digital surveillance was highly present. Police deployment was there, and checking of IDs, keeping records became a common phenomena. So these kind of activities he noted in 2018. New York Times released a paper on the beginning of the concentration camps, but in Xinjiang's Urumqi Party School, in one of the articles in 2017, the de-extremification mechanism has been mentioned, and they also mentioned that how does it work? It works in 3 ways, which is through re-education system, legal system, or rehabilitation centers. So in connection to that, again, I asked my respondents, 2 of them, he's a Uyghur scholar, also a PhD candidate, Abdul Rahim Devlat, another guy, he's from Hotan, another guy from Gulja. They said that before they come to Turkey in 2015, they came very recently, they spotted new constructions happening in Hotan and in Gulja. So these phenomena were spotted by the Uyghur people. And China kept denying until in 2020 that there are no such concentration camps in East Turkestan. In 2020, a white paper was released. Then first time China claimed that or said that it has provided from 2014 to 2019 vocational training to 1.3 million people. And to all my 50 interviewees whom I talked to, they have testified that the family members are in concentration camps. They have lost contact since 2017. They are not being able to talk to them. They don't know whether they are dead or alive. And they also stated that any act of, Uyghurs Act, either practicing religion or anything related to Uyghur cultural practice could be deemed as an act of extremism. So I asked them, do they know what made or landed your family members in concentration camp? Of course, I cannot put pictures of all the 50 people, but these are the 50 people who are regularly active in Turkey, fighting for their family members' release or wanted to know about their whereabouts. On the first picture, if you see this is Malike's mom. China keeps saying that it is fighting against religious extremism, but these three cases, I would say, is not related to any kind of, religious activities that these people deserve to be there in the concentration camp. That's what China says. So in the first picture, if you see, Malike's uncle and aunt has been taken to concentration camp. Her uncle is a journalist, and her uncle is a journalist, and he has also translated Deng Xiaoping book from Mandarin to Kazakh language, while two of her aunts, one works in the media houses and the other one is a businesswoman. They had no connection with, practicing Muslim or something like this. The second picture of Jevlan, his mother was very much connected to CCP party. She was closely attached, working as a civil servant. And despite that, she was taken to concentration camp in 2018. And he's still fighting for the release of his mother. The third picture is about Madina's sister. She was living in Turkey. And because of some family issues, she traveled back to Turkey. Since then, Madina cannot, she lost contact with her sister, and she has no whereabouts where her sister is. And lately she got to know that her sister was also taken to concentration camp. I also interviewed the concentration camp survivors, and according to their testimony, the camp system works in three ways: pre-detention center, re-education center, and prison. So Mr. Otabai, he is of Kazakh origin, but he was taken to pre-detention center for 98 days. For what reason? Because of having apps like WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, or sharing contents, maybe normal Islamic religious content. And he spent 98 days in pre-detention center, mentally tortured, physically tortured, beaten up, and in shackles all the time. Similarly, I talked to Kalbinur. She is not a direct concentration camp victim, but she is connected to what the Uyghurs have been experiencing in concentration camp. She was recruited to teach Mandarin in the concentration camp, and she taught in both the camps, male camp and female camp, and she was describing the routine that she was supposed to teach the Uyghurs, detainees, Mandarin, grammar, praise Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping taught, learn Chinese songs, etc. And her ordeal was that the female concentration camps are more despicable. The females are suffering all kinds of torture, mental torture, physical torture, rape, sterilization, etc. And China's employment of hard power and assertive assimilation agenda does not just limit to its jurisdiction. It has extended beyond borders. The first speaker mentions about Idris Hassan case. Yes, this is Idris Hassan's wife along with 3 children. Her husband last year was arrested at Morocco airport because of Morocco airport because Chinese government requested Interpol notice against him of terrorism activities. So this lady along with her 3 children is protesting every day to get her husband released. This is another incident where Uyghurs in Turkey are protesting every day for their family members to be released or to know about their conditions about the family members. In one such activity, when they were in, protesting outside the Ankara Chinese embassy in Ankara, a directive was released by the Chinese embassy, not asking not to believe the lies peddled by the Uyghur diaspora in Turkey, and also, reminding the Turkish officials that these are all propagandas, and the Chinese embassy heavily criticized these Uyghur protesters. So to conclude, I would like to say that, the Uyghurs are facing a human rights violation. The current visit of UN High Commissioner, Ms. Michelle, to China, and her response has been very disappointing. I would emphasize that this is just a visit. Of course, she proved this is just a visit and not an investigation. Her response, her cautious response, was like a mockery to all the sufferings which the Uyghurs are facing. And until the Western Muslim countries succumb to such pressures, and also the international institutions like UN succumb to Chinese pressure, Uyghur community faces the risk of eradication of their identity, their language, their culture. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions or discussions.
Thank you, Sadia. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I think your last point especially is very important, because I think that's where a lot of questions also we have. The international response, and also especially, like you mentioned, response from Islamic countries. And also, to that matter, world at large, even the US has also started talking about these issues after the US and China trade war that started. I think also you highlighted the way China used the 9/11 to kind of brand the whole Uyghur population, as a terrorist, as terrorists. I think these are important points. So the first question, so if the questions are not addressed to any specific panelist, what I'll do is that I will, ask the question and then give 1 or 2 minutes each to each panelist to, give their views on the question. So the first question is that the United States recently talked and also passed a bill related to human rights exploitation in Xinjiang. But it is reported that it had not even given a single asylum to Uyghurs, and especially, political asylum. So what is your comment about such situations? I would like to first invite, I think, Professor Kharluk, if he can give his view, and then we'll move on to Professor Shir and Sadia.
Sorry to interrupt, sorry. I would also like to invite Professor Erkin to join in the Q&A. If somebody can translate the questions, he can also contribute his inputs.
I think he messaged us that he's leaving because he has another meeting in the chat.
Okay, sure, no problem. Thank you.
The first question from, I think, Yan Yang. My answer is maybe different. I can say my dominated view that's a problem experienced by Uyghurs, whether you call it Uyghur genocide or a violation of Uyghur human rights, are used between great powers. I give an example. Once I met a United States bureaucrat, high level from U.S. Embassy. I asked some questions. I say to him, yes, you, United States of America, made many decisions for Uyghurs. You passed laws in Congress, but I would like to know how many Uyghurs have you granted American citizenship in the last 5 years? Second question is, how many people, Uyghur people, have you granted asylum seekers? Because as you know, in Southeast Asia, especially in Thailand and some Muslim countries, Uyghur face very bad conditions. Third question is, why didn't you take the Uyghurs from K prisons or the Uyghurs from Istanbul? Take your country. Of course, he was very surprised for these questions. Maybe he does not expect this kind of questions. My opinion is what happened did not lessen the oppressions and the persecutions of Uyghurs is still continuing. It has been 5 years, and the simplest communication with the region cannot be established. Even Western countries pass a lot of decisions or decided Uyghur genocide, etc. Even an academician like me, who has made an academic career in China, Beijing, or Western country, even in Turkey, cannot communicate with anyone in the region in any way. I don't think the situation is getting any better for the Uyghurs. Thank you. Also, I think Yanvi Yang has a second question. I read it. If give me permission, I would like to answer a second question.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yanvi Yang question is, would you like to make some comment about Uyghur diaspora, how they navigate the network of diaspora community to work on advocacy for what's happening in Xinjiang, chapters in diaspora? What are their primary concerns in diaspora? What are the major challenges in diaspora? I do not think that the diaspora active were organized, because there is no country that gives strong support to the Uyghur diaspora. Also, Chinese government, CCP, is working very efficiently to break up the diaspora. Uyghur diaspora is trying their best to end the persecution in the region. All of those efforts are peacefully and within in the framework of the laws of the respective countries. But I can say is that the persecution of China in the last 10 years has aroused an unprecedented hatred of China among the Uyghur diaspora. One of the biggest concerns of Uyghur diaspora is the inability to receive reliable news from the region, East Turkestan, and the news that the Uyghur genocide continues in all areas. This situation creates various problems for the Uyghurs, especially psychological problems. The great challenge facing the diaspora, in my view, is its sometimes helplessness in the face of China's powerful lobbying and the lies. It is the direct or indirect increase of China's pressure on Uyghurs, especially in non-Western countries, especially Turkish and the Islamic countries. This is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Shir, there's also another question that's directly pointed at you. Maybe you can take them together. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be very, very brief. Actually, referring to the first questions about American assistance to the Uyghur factors, I would say, you need to think from this approach. In modern international politics, of course, it's dominated by states, especially powerful states. America have no reasons to help the Uyghur peoples without any, without any interest being benefited to their own. So it's two aims actually. On the one hand, it's try to helping the Uyghur to survive and not to be abused by Chinese authority, and looking after safeguard the universal values. On the other hand, they need to use Uyghur cause to stop or to somehow deter China's intended expansion and threat the U.S. dominance in world politics. The two need to come together. Otherwise, why the U.S. should help the Uyghur? And on the other hand, you need to thinking from another approach. Uyghur diaspora in the world, also including Uyghur people living in Xinjiang, living in China. These group of people has been survived for hundreds and thousands of years. I think they they are very resilient. They can survive in the futures, no matter the camp policy will be carried on or not. But anyhow, these people, they will survive. And people keep on changing. They need to face all kinds of challenges being laid down by nature and also political world. So I'm not that kind of pessimistic towards Uyghur peoples. They don't need to rely on others. They can survive even without the help from US, without Turkey. They can still survive. Regarding to another questions, what would be the factor influence the country like the US or others to impose sanctions? I think I somehow answered the questions. They have their own interest to look after us. Of course, to jeopardize the current basic human rights, to pose the threat to the foundation of the making of the United States, and probably nowadays in liberal democracies. And that's basic reasons why they need to defend. And if someone's threat, the ultimate base of your individual existence, certainly you will stand up and defend as well. I think this is the simple reason. At the same time, it's not so simple. When the US introduced all kinds of sanctions, all kinds of bills to China, referring to the Xinjiang coast, their internal fights, especially during the presidential campaign, the kind of forced labor, try to ban the import of cottons. There are all kinds of commercial associations try to lobby the Democrats, also Republican. You need to, not to legislate the act in such a restricted and severe way. Try to open some back doors. They can still do business somehow. And these taking place all the time, without doubt, actually. Their information available online as well. You can easily find them. So it's something, to make it very simple, it's a interest network. People, they need to think of their own benefit, but also think for the well-being of others at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sher. As we are running out of time, Sadia, just maybe quickly give your response in a minute or two, and then we will wrap up. Thank you.
I see two questions. I would take up the last question first. Are there any official sources about the current population in Turkey? I'm not aware about that, but yes, when I was there doing my field trip, I asked this question to most of the professors and general audience whom I meet there, and they told me that close to around 50,000 to 60,000 Uyghurs are there, the Uyghur diaspora present in Turkey. And there's another question that somebody has asked, do Uyghur people identify themselves as Muslims rather than a nationality or race, right? I'm not sure that how the person is connecting race. It could be interchangeably used as ethnic identity also. So I would just talk from the point of view of Uyghur diaspora in Turkey, that when I was interviewing them, yes, their identity is Uyghur, but they definitely connect with the religious identity, the Muslim identity. And most of them are practicing Muslims. They believe, they practice their faith, they practice Islam, and they are also taking modern education and religious education. Yeah, that's the short answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia, for keeping it short and precise. I would like to thank Dr. Delmar Shering. Sir, do you want to say something?
Of course, if possible.
Oh, no. Actually, we're running late,
yeah,
so I just want to, So I want to thank actually Namrata for leading the session and also the discussions. And we have many questions, and all the presenter for really for your insightful presentation and the raw data that you have presented. So so we are very grateful for your presentation. So thank you once again.
Thank you. Thanks to you for organizing this, and I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you, and
thank you.
Wonderful session. Thank you.